Okay, so I'm making this video amidst the backdrop of the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. But don't worry, I'm not going to add fuel to the fire on that situation, which is something that CNN has actually been accused of. Um, what I want to talk about is wider issues. It is about America in general. So I'm not going to go into detail about the Ferguson situation because it's a moving situation and there's lots of ins and outs to that. And anyway, I want to cover wider issues, so because of the time frame of this video, I'm going to just cover wider issues rather than Ferguson. But I think the unrest in Ferguson does give a context for this video and why I feel it needs to be made. We often hear this line that America is the greatest country in the world. Now, I want to frankly question that claim in this video, but before I continue, I want to make it very clear this should not be seen as an anti-American video in any way. I still believe the United States is a great country. I still believe it's a country with great potential, and I still think it has a lot of merits. In no way do I regard myself as anti-American. I'm anti certain things in America, but I'm not anti-American per se. I think the US is a great country, but I have an American flag in my room. So why am I talking about America? Well, the fact of the matter is, it is the most powerful country in the world. Greatest, that's something I'm going to question, but most powerful there's not much doubt about that. Russia and China are obviously rivals to the United States, but to all extensive purposes, militarily and economically, the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and it does remain the sole superpower in the true sense of the word. Obviously China is posing a real rivalry, but right now I would say the United States is the sole superpower. But power alone doesn't necessarily correlate with all-round greatness. It's one factor, but it's not everything. And I just want to talk about some of America's problems from my perspective as an outsider. And I know a lot of Americans would agree with these points, because I've seen Americans question this as well. The claims of greatness usually come from presidents, and in a way that's their job. They have to big up their nation. Every world leader does that. And other politicians as well, and certain celebrities will say things like this is the greatest country on earth. There is a certain arrogance to it when you hear things like, I've heard it from Obama, but I've heard it from other politicians, sort of things like, in no other part of the world would this story even be possible. Well, that automatically is just not true. The idea, sometimes listening to Obama or other leading politicians, you would get the impression that America is the only free country in the world. This is not only insulting to America's allies and other democratic states, but it is just factually not true. And also, the thing about freedom is something that really needs to be. Freedom is often a word that is thrown around, and it is obviously something that is at the core of American values. But we need to really think about what the word means in its true sense in order to evaluate that. But anyway, before I maybe touch on that, I want to talk about the problems that I think America has as an outsider. So without further ado, here is some of the problems. America incarcerates more people than the rest of the world combined. Incidentally, before I continue, I'm saying America, obviously I'm talking about the United States. America, I know, is technically two continents, but for the sake of common usage, America, I'm talking about the United States, just easier to say. The United States, America, incarcerates more people than anywhere else in the world, including China. China executes more people, but the United States has more prisoners than any other country in the world. Now, it does need to be recognised that it also has the third biggest population, so naturally, in a country with a big population, you're going to have more prisoners than a country with a small population. But even proportionally speaking, the United States has more inmates than anywhere else, by far. I believe it's something like 2 million if I recall from the Guinness Book of Records. Now, it's not that a lot of these people don't deserve to be behind bars. I have no sympathy for violent criminals who terrorise society. But I also have no doubt there are a lot of people who don't deserve to be behind bars. I heard the case of a Florida man recently who was 90 years old, was threatened with jail for feeding the homeless. Now that is bordering on totalitarianism. It's the sort of thing you would hear about in single-party states. So much for freedom. There are many Americans who have committed relatively minor felonies and who are incarcerated, in some cases in some pretty brutal prisons. And American prisons, as democratic societies go, are pretty brutal. You have organised gangs, you have a very high level of violence, you have a militarised system. This is something that is not really in tandem with a country that is supposed to be the freest in the world. Now, just to be clear, I'm not a liberal on crime. I do believe that criminals should be behind bars, but the fact remains America locks up more people than any other country on earth, and a lot of those people don't deserve to be locked up because the so-called crimes are very minor felonies. For example, drug offences that are involve personal drug use, throwing someone in jail like a low-level pot user in with a violent gang member is just stupid. So that's one factor. Gun violence, now to me this is the most striking issue, and it's something I've got very strong views on, so I will admit there's bias on my part here. But it is indisputable, despite what the gun lobby says, and despite what those who want to keep their head in the sand say, America has a very serious problem with gun violence. This is indisputable. And no matter how many excuses the gun lobby and gun apologists come out with, and when I say gun apologists, by the way, I'm not talking about every gun owner, I want to make that very clear. I'm talking about the people who will not take their head out of the sand and recognise that there is a problem. I'm talking about the open carry crowd. I'm talking about these people who are so stubborn that they cannot see there is a severe problem here. If you compare the United States to almost any other developed country, the state of gun violence soars above anywhere else. Now, again, people might say there's a bigger population, but even in proportional terms, it doesn't add up. America is a very violent country when it comes to gun crime. That is indisputable. This is a very severe problem, and in my opinion, it's a threat to American national security, actually. It's a threat to American stability, and it is a threat to the Human Development Index in the United States. At least it should be seen as that. Because what it is producing is a desensitized society, not from the victims and not from gun control advocates, but it's creating a very paranoid environment where people are arming themselves with firearms because they believe their government is out to get them. This is dangerous. Clearly, America's gun problem is out of control. Now, there are good people, brave people who are trying to do something about it, but unfortunately there are also a lot of people who are in denial about this problem. I've been in debates with them. If you check out my other videos, you'll see plenty of and I accept that this is not necessarily popular opinion. I accept that there is a gun culture in America. Unfortunately, that gun culture has translated into a gun epidemic, and this madness is, in my opinion, it holds America back. That is nothing to be proud of, and it is something that is, it's just a situation that is out of control. I'm not saying America is the worst country for this. Probably you could find some examples in Latin America that are worse, but definitely this would put question to the claim that America is the safest country in the world, or the great. I mean, if you were talking about greatness, that presumably would involve a lot of things. Well, America certainly isn't the safest country in the world when it comes to gun violence. I mean, it seems that there is now a massacre every week. So I'm not going to go too far on this point because I've made specific videos about it, but in my opinion, America's gun violence and the denials, the stubborn denials from the National Rifle Association and the open carry crowd and so on, just demonstrates how big a problem this is and how big a challenge there is for gun control advocates. They have had some successes, but there's a very long way to go. And when you look at most other Western societies, whether it be France or Britain or Canada or Australia, the United States is far, far, far deadlier when it comes to gun violence, proportionally speaking. Wealth poverty indiscrepancy, there is undoubtedly a huge gulf between the haves and the have-nots in America. Now, I've never been a utopian. I've never sort of advocated that everyone should be absolutely equal. That's not just not reality. But to be the world's biggest economy, the United States actually has a lot of poverty. This is something that really needs to be addressed. And it's not so much about hammering the rich, it's about when you have a gulf that is that big in society. And incidentally, my own country is pretty bad in this regard as well. So in no way am I being jingoistic in saying that America is the only country with these problems, but these are problems. To be the world's biggest economy, America has some shocking poverty, especially in certain southern states. And this is something that hasn't really changed since the days of Lyndon Johnson. In fact, it arguably has got worse. So there's, you could look at different statistics, but it is indisputable that this remains a very big problem. The National Security Agency. Well, for a country that prides itself on freedom, again, there's actually a huge amount of government override. And I don't think you can just blame this on Obama, although certainly he has to answer some tough questions about this, but it goes back to presidents throughout my lifetime. There is definitely government overreach in terms of what agencies like the NSA are doing, and quite frankly, it is hard to see a great deal of difference between that and what happens in communist societies. Obviously there's different situations. Americans can freely protest and they can be angry about it, but I think the Obama administration's response to this has been flimsy at best. These are very serious. This is a very serious situation when you have the government spying on private individuals, the vast majority of whom are not a national security threat. Now, every government in the world needs to take security measures, and I don't think any sane person would fault a government for that. But I think in the emergence of the NSA scandal, it really poses some very serious questions. If you look at Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory shows, I certainly don't buy into a lot of the things that he covers, and I think there's a lot of pockmarks in terms of things that could be sort of countered in terms of the arguments he is making. Nevertheless, a lot of the issues that are raised in those programs, I think there are some valid questions to be raised. I don't agree with all of them. I'm talking about Jesse Ventura, the former governor of Minnesota. He presents a program called Conspiracy Theory, which is a very interesting show. It buys into sort of all sorts of conspiracy theories that the government and big business and so on is out to get the American people. I think a lot of it is a bit flawed, and it is only showing one side, but definitely there are legitimate questions to be asked there. Other issues. Police power. I have long believed that, and I don't want to comment on specific cases, but there is unquestionably a trend that of American police committing violence against American civilians, and basically the police being let off scot-free. And this again is something that is growing in the UK as well, but it seems to me that in the United States police have the power of gods. What I mean by that is, it seems even questioning why you're being arrested is enough to be beaten up. Definitely American police seem to be trigger happy. They definitely seem to override their mark. You can see this around with police forces around the world, but it is very obvious in America. What you have is a situation of increasingly militarized police, very arrogant police who believe that wearing a uniform gives them a right to do as they please. Of course, with any of these situations, it isn't universal. I'm sure there's plenty of decent officers in the States who just try to do the job without overriding the mark, but I also believe there's a generation of American cops who basically think they are RoboCop, and they think that wearing that uniform gives them a right to do as they please. And there's also a public attitude in America that sort of accepts this. It's sort of like, well, if someone's wearing a uniform, they're above criticism. This is a very dangerous situation. and it is actually the epitome of a police state. There are certain American states I would basically describe as police states. I'm running to the end of the bandwidth now, but this is all about internal issues. I haven't covered foreign policy and so on. I don't have time in this video. But my conclusion would be, America is a great country, and it's a country with great potential, but I think it's arrogant and dishonest to say that it's the world's greatest country. I'm not going to say what is the world's greatest country because I don't know, but I can't believe that it is the United States of America. And that's tragic because the US is a wonderful country. Most Americans are decent people, and I just think that a lot of these issues need to be really looked at before this claim of American greatness gets thrown around.